I knew that the Cubs were going to be very active this offseason. You're entering year 4 now of the Theo Epstein, Jed Hoyer master plan rebuilding project of the Chicago Cubs. And now you've reached that point in time where some of the young prospects of the past few years are starting to make it to the big league level. And you're getting to that point now where you can no longer just sit there and hide behind the fact that, hey, we're young, we're building for the future. At some point in time, that future has to start being the present. And I knew it was going to be right around this time. It was going to be this offseason where the Cubs started to get a little more proactive, where they started to get a little more aggressive, and they started to loosen up the purse strings. They didn't really need to do that much before now, but now they needed to. So I was fully anticipating the Cubs making several big moves in free agency, and I don't think they're done this offseason. They might have another big move or two left in them. I would fully expect that to happen. And with all the talk about the Cubs needing to acquire an ace frontline starting pitching, and understandably so, because that's spot on the mark, the Cubs did need that. I knew another area of emphasis heading into this offseason was going to be the catcher position. I just knew it for several different reasons. Number one, there was a lot more money available now, so that way the Cubs could sit there with some of the young prospects coming up that are cheap, that are cost controlled by the organization for the next several years, that they could afford to go a little bit overboard and spend some big money on a position, and in this case, an important position for them like catcher. This is an organization that feels that Wellington Castillo isn't enough, and he very well might not be. They're also uncertain about the organizational depth at the position. They just don't have a lot in the farm system at catcher, and especially with Kyle Schwarber, perhaps first-round pick, maybe having a better profile down the road as an outfielder than a catcher. The Cubs knew that this was a need organizationally, and they knew at some point in time they were going to probably have to bring somebody in. And if they were going to do so, this might be the opportunity, and this might be the time to do it. So I wasn't that surprised when I heard that the Cubs were very heavy in on the Russell Martin sweepstakes. I was ultimately happy that they didn't get him, but I wasn't that surprised to hear that they were in the catcher market and that they were going after Martin. And then when the attention started to shift to Miguel Montero, that also didn't surprise me either, because I had a feeling that at the end of the day, the Cubs were going to bring in some type of bigger name catcher, some type of higher paid catcher this offseason to replace Wellington Castillo, and that's exactly what they've done. They traded away a couple minor league players to the Diamondbacks, and now they've acquired Miguel Montero. And this is being trumpeted as a big-time move for the Cubs. This is, part of the master plan. This is a stroke of genius by Theo and Jed. This is a chance for them to buy low a little bit and, get potentially a very big return, which they've done with several other players and prospects that they've brought into the team, into the program, if you will, the organization the past few years. But I'm just sitting here and I'm looking at this deal. And while I understand the organizational and positional need, I agree it was there. And I understand where the Cubs felt like they needed to address that now, because, again, I kind of agree. And they didn't have to give up a whole lot in this deal in terms of prospects, which is good. I just don't think this Miguel Montero trade makes all that much sense. I just frankly don't see where this is that much of an upgrade, and I just don't see where this helps this team that much. Here's a Miguel Montero who's going to be 32 next July. That is owed $40 million between 2015, 16, and 17. $40 million, over $13 million a season, to a guy that's never hit 300 in a season, that's never had 20 home runs, and his last 2 seasons he had a batting average of .230 in 2013 and .243 last year. You could sit there and talk about, well, he had a bad stretch, but he's done better before. Well, even if you assert that, and even if you say that's true, again, the guy's never hit 300. He's never had 20 home runs. You could talk about him being an upgrade over Castillo defensively, and that's probably true. But is he that big of a defensive upgrade, for crying out loud? We're talking about a 31 going to be 32-year-old catcher who's hitting in the 230 to 240 range with limited power, and you're talking about paying him over $13 million a year for the next 3 seasons. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Where on the flip side, you've got Wellington Castillo, who's going to be 28 next April. You still have him arbitration eligible, basically under team control through 2017. So in the next 3 years where you're going to be paying Miguel Montero $40 million, you could have been paying Wellington Castillo a fraction of that. And frankly, the production drop-off isn't that significant offensively or defensively. We're talking about a Castillo who hit 274 back in 2013. He had 13 home runs this year. Yes, he's had some trouble staying healthy. And yes, he's not the best behind the plate defensively. But damn it all, over $13 million a year to a guy in his 30s who the last 2 seasons has hit 230 and 243, never hit 300, never even hit 20 home runs, will have over 100 strikeouts, or $1 million, $1.5 million, maybe $2.5 million to a guy who's 28 next April, who you could still keep at that type of contract level for the next couple of years, who has shown some flashes of potential with the bat. What's the better option here? What's the better route to go down? Just because you can spend doesn't mean you always should. And I've understood the past few years why the Cubs largely haven't spent their money. And I was okay with that because I didn't think the timing was right. I didn't think the situations were right. I didn't think the talents available on the market were right for the organization at that place and time. But it's like now all of a sudden there's some money that's been saved aside. A lot of it, a couple $100 million of it in payroll over the past few years. Of course, now most of that is being dumped into Wrigley Field. But just because you can spend again, doesn't mean you should. And is Miguel Montero's defense and slightly better power worth $10 million more a season or more than Wellington Castillo? I don't think it is. I just have trouble believing that all of a sudden now Miguel Montero is going to have this great renaissance season in 2015 where he's going to hit 300 or he's going to hit for more than 20 home runs and he's going to play a gold glove caliber of defense. I don't see any of that happening. It's like you were just determined to make a statement and make us try to make some type of splash. It was like the Cubs were just determined to say, hey, we'll spend some money on some fucking buddy by making this trade with Miguel Montero. That's all this really looks like to me. Because from a sheer baseball standpoint, I just don't see where this makes much sense, both on the field and on the balance sheets, the financial books. $13+ million a year to a guy who the last 2 seasons has hit 230 and 243, never hit 300, never hit 20 home runs, and by the way, will be 32 in July. I understand Montero is a better player than Castillo. I do not dispute that. But I don't think he's $10+ million a year better. I think you could settle with a little bit less out of Castillo and pay him a whole lot less and reinvest that into other places in the organization. Or if you are determined to go after somebody as an upgrade at catcher, go after somebody that is really outstanding, either with the bat or with the glove. In the case of Montero, you just kind of played it down the middle of the road, and I think the Cubs, frankly, kind of whiffed here. I really do. I don't have that much faith that this will be a move that we look back on in a couple of years and say, wow, this was a great move or this was tremendous. We're just probably going to look at this guy in Montero and say, yeah, he's just a slightly better version of Wellington Castillo and he cost us a whole hell of a lot more money. Just because you can spend doesn't mean you should. And if these are the type of moves that the Theo and Jed regime is going to make over the next year or two to try and build a real legitimate championship contender in Chicago on the north side, then color me concerned. Because this move, for sure, has me very concerned about the decision-making and the direction set in place by Theo and Jed. This trade, to me, just doesn't make any sense.